Chiefs training camp is underway. Everybody's got to make their stake for a 53-man spot. Who's doing that? Who's pushing the bubble? And who are those long shots that you want to know about? Matt Derrick's here from ChiefsDigest.com to lock us in on it all. Welcome to Locked On Chiefs.
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Hi, friends and neighbors. We are brought to you today by FanDuel Sportsbook. You can check them out over at FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every moment more with them. We have a ton to talk to as the Chiefs get a lighter day. They're off. I had a 10-10-10 yesterday. I emphasized a couple different things that I think we're all happy to see. But who's made the push to this point? And at a breaking point, we always try to take stock. Matt Derrick from ChiefsDigest.com, the beat writer at large, is with us to tell us exactly what's going on. We're going to get to it, but thanks for making us your first listen today. Check out another Locked On show for your next listen because we have it all, every team covered all preseason long. We're here for you 5 days a week. I think you guys know that. You everydayers are aware, but like, sub, hit the bell, and get subbed on Spotify and Apple if you're not, because we're on every platform every day, as many days as I can squeeze in until I keel over or Chris gets back from vacation. So back to normal. Matt, it's here, and welcome to a day off where you don't have to be in St. Joan at the crack of dawn.
Yeah, for those of you watching on the video, you're not going to get a better look at me because this is a day off. I've had a haircut.
Well done.
This is peak Matt Derrick that you're getting right here. So
you're looking trim. You're looking svelte there, very much in the informative manner.
Even the stylist even trimmed up my beard a little bit. So, I mean, you're talking about literally the best I've probably ever looked in my entire life right here. So
where's the red carpet, Matt? Where is the red carpet? I'm ready. I mean, you look as fresh as Isaiah Pacheco going out to practice every morning. So I'm very happy for you. But I think happiness is in the eye of the beholder. It's been kind of a rough go since pads came on. A little bit edgy, a little bit chippy. I think it feels like the tempo has come up to me, and that a lot of, especially with so many new players, both not just, first year guys, but even guys in their sophomore campaign, they're still getting into the heat and the humidity in St. Joe, getting used to the way the practice is going to go. Even if you've been through it once, you're probably not really ecstatic about how quick that it's been going. Is that just my perception, or what do you notice is different for Andy Reid's camp?
Yeah, I think you've hit on it. And Andy kind of pointed to this the other day a little bit about just the number of new guys, not only rookies, but free agents and second-year guys who are still trying to prove themselves, as you mentioned. Because, it's the same old practice. It's the same old Andy Reid tempo. And that's the one thing that's going to be new for a lot of the newcomers and free agents, is that they're used to training camps that are a little bit more lollygagging at times. And with Andy Reid, there's no wasted motion. You get here, you're going to work. He's going to take advantage of however many minutes he's got you on the field that day. And you're going to do more work than you'd probably do at a 30-minute longer practice somewhere else. And so I think that's part of it, because honestly, punching the football out for defensive players is fairly normal. That's what you do. The defensive coaches want their guys to be punching at footballs because that's how you get turnovers. Offensive coaches are okay with that because that's how you learn to protect the football. I think the catch, with what has made this camp chippier, especially with a couple of the incidents involving Travis, is that it's kind of like, Chiefs training camp is a little bit like prison. How do you get your street cat shred? You pick on the biggest, baddest guy on the block and you try and get the football from him. So, you're seeing a lot of people punching the football at Travis, and he gets it worse than anybody else does. Any receiver, any running back, he gets it worse than anybody. Yep. And I think he had enough of it. So I think he was just like, enough of these shenanigans, and that was it. So, and it was also hot. Probably a couple of the hotter practices that we've had in St. Joe in a while. So I don't know. It has felt a little bit chippier, but I do think that's a product of this team being younger than it has been in a long time. Some of the fresh faces, just, and a team that's, the coaches are trying to keep this team on edge. That's how they're going to go back to back, is by making sure that all these guys are uncomfortable all the time.
Well, and that's the thing. That's the focus. Drew Trank will let us in on the presentation first slide that's everywhere, and that's hard to do. It's hard for experienced teams that have the majority of veterans on their roster to stay up for the next season if you just come off a championship. For this team, having gone to the Super Bowl 3 times, coming away with 2 championships, it's got to be difficult to stay motivated. So I like that aspect. I don't like anybody taking a swing that, needs to use his hands for a living, but that's a different story. In the end, I think the tempo helps keep that edge, keep those guys from being comfortable. Like you said, there's an old saying in NAVSEC war that, you get comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's the concept here, right? So does it go beyond that? I think Rashee Rice was pretty uncomfortable the first day, but he's made a big acclimatization here. And I think he in particular is the guy that I notice clicking in early in camp that really is bucking the trend of what we saw last year, where I think the whole pass catching group is a little bit further along than they were at what is it, 5 practices in or 4 padded practices in. Is your perception that they're on track for the same kind of development, or where are they in your mind?
Yeah, I could make a case that this wide receiver group maybe in some ways isn't advanced as last year's because it's not as experienced. I mean, they've gotten a few veterans here and there, but last year when you had Juju and Marquez leading the pack, you felt like, hey, that's a pretty experienced group. If the other guys can help out and fall in line, you're going to have a pretty good room. I mean, this year, your top 2 receivers right now are Marquez and Sky Moore. I mean, Sky Moore is, for all intents and purposes, a veteran on this team. I mean, there's young guys looking up to him. And I think Richie James will certainly be a guy. I mean, that's somebody else that's got a lot of experience on this team that young guys are looking up to. He will fit in more and more, I think, with this offense. But remember, Kadarius, even though he's not playing right now, is still a fairly young receiver and inexperienced receiver when you look at purely game time. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think experience-wise, they're not quite there. But I think you are seeing a little bit more talent and a little bit more development this year. Sky Moore is light years ahead of where he was last year. Rashee Rice coming in is more polished and developed as a receiver right now than Sky Moore was last year. So in a few pieces and places, at least you're ahead of the pack with the young guys. I mean, the younger receivers on this team, I think, are more polished than maybe the young guys were last year. So you're lacking maybe a little bit of veteran experience, but I think they make up for that in some other areas.
I think that's a yin and yang. I want to talk about where the standard is and who's pushing to make that wide receiver group after the break here. But folks, we are live. If you would like to sub and get in on everything that we're doing, I would appreciate that. But please keep it civil in the chat. I'm going to ban everybody that's going to start calling names. So just let it out there and don't mess around. So who is going to make that? 4, 5, 6? What's the stagger going to be? Who else is looking for a spot on the 53-man? We're going to get to that after we hear from a word from our pals over at FanDuel. It's time for you to take your first swing at MLB betting with FanDuel and get 10 times back on your first bet amount in bonus bets. That's up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets whether you win or lose. That's $200 you can be spending on everything from the money line to the over-under to the first home run hit to RBIs to anything that you're looking to track and bet on. All in the app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. All gets you paid instantly. There's no better place to get into the MLB action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, and you can do it right here at FanDuel.com/lockedon for up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get in it today. FanDuel is the official sportsbook betting partner of the MLB, the NBA, and your NFL. So while we're on the topic of Richie James in particular, I think there's a misconception here that we've been seeing through these first couple of weeks in that while the fan base is all about explosive plays, potential ceiling on a given player, making it, particularly in the pass catcher group, I think the staff and the front office are very much keen on experience, reliability, adjustability. And so that, to me, says that Richie James is up here on the depth chart as well as Rashee Rice is playing. He's probably going to get Rice is probably going to get less time than James right out the bat because of the experience factor. Does that track for you?
Yeah, it does. And, it's really intriguing to me to see how this receiver group is going to pan out and how it's going to shake out depth chart wise, because it's been a little bit difficult to really get a good grasp on how the Chiefs truly view this receiver group, because I do think some young guys have been getting reps ahead of some other veterans because, the Chiefs to a degree know what those guys can do and know what they're going to be expected of. Marquez and Sky are getting a lot of reps right now because they're going to be the starters. And those are two guys that you're probably going to be counting on to play any position. I mean, they're going to be lining up all over the field. They're going to ask to do a lot of things. Richie James, I think, will probably only be asked to maybe play one role. I mean, he may not be a guy that you spread through all three spots. So maybe his work is a little bit different. Also, this is a long camp and a long preseason, so it could be a case of getting other guys some reps in front of him, just because there's some younger guys who do need more experience. But, the other thing to really think about this is that, I think we usually think about the Chiefs and having, all these receivers out there. I mean, Chiefs are going to have a lot of offense this year without a lot of receivers on the field. Because what are they going to be doing? I mean, there's going to be a lot of 12 personnel. There's going to be a lot of 13 personnel. There's going to be, multiple tight ends on the field. They're going to take advantage of these running backs that they've got. They're going to split them out wide on occasions. They're going to put, receivers in the backfield. I mean, they're going to do a lot of different things. So, I mean, just thinking of it as, Chiefs need to go 3, 4, 5 receivers deep. Well, they do, but that doesn't mean they're going to have 4 receivers on the field all the time. It's probably going to be less of that than normal, because I think that Andy Reid sees something with multiple tight end sets that he's taking advantage of, and it is going to build an offense around that. So that's a little bit of it, but I do think there's a clear line of where this group is. I mean, I think, depending on how many receivers the Chiefs keep on the opening roster, Justin Ross is probably right there on that line as far as, a group above him and a group below him. After that, you get into the Amir Smith-Marsetts and that, those kind of receivers. And then there's a younger group behind that. I know Nico Remigio is the big fan for everybody. But I mean, he's a long shot. I mean, he truly is a long shot to make the roster. There's no doubt about that. But I think the rest of it is I think there's a pretty good rotation we're seeing shaken out. It's just, to me, it's going to be wait until after the first preseason game, because that's when things will really kind of start to solidify themselves. If some guys have some good performances, they can ensure that they're on the right side of the cut line. You have a questionable performance, you're going to be on the other side.
It's funny because that's exactly when I aim to go to camp, is after the first preseason game. And Matt, long shots are coming in the third segment. We're just talking about the guys right now. But I like the way you're going. And we have to remember that usually this is a 6 wide receiver team on cut down day. But last year they only kept 5. I've actually been pushing for 7 because of how disparate all the talent is and how high a floor a number of these guys have. But you make a great point. Jody's been good when on the field, but again, another injury that we have to be concerned about. Noah Gray's been playing pretty well. Matt Bushman is coming on. We have to keep room for that. Obviously, Prince is shocking everyone. I know we're going to have a question later from Stu in the third segment about who that is, but right now, in your mind on the offensive side, who's pushing to make their case for the 53 that's right on that bubble other than Ross you already mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, tight end is going to be really where the conversation is, because you may have we'll see about Jody and that shoulder, how long it's going to keep him out. It's not something that's going to be long term that they're going to put him on IR for now, which would mean he's going to be missing the first chunk of the season. Chances are he may be healthy for week 1. If not, maybe you do have to make a consideration for him. But you've got right now 5 tight ends who are making a good case to be on the roster. And, there's no guarantee with a guy like Matt Bushman that, he would sneak onto the waiver list, because remember, he had a great preseason last year, had that great game before the clavicle injury. He's not an unknown quantity. So, I think there might be some teams willing to take a shot at him. He's probably the one that I would have said, I don't know what his 53 chances are going into this, but has really improved his chances to the point where I think it's really hard not to put Matt Bushman on this roster. I mean, he's certainly given Blake Bell and I think Jody Fortson both, a run for their money. I mean, to the point where he's making a compelling case to be the number 3 tight end. So that's a guy I think that has made the best case. There's been some others as well, but I don't think there's anything that's too surprising. If anything, the Najee Johnson injury probably solidifies a few things, because I'm working on my next roster projection right now. And, if you're keeping, and I think that before that, you had to seriously think about keeping 11 defensive backs. losing Nazi means you can probably keep 10 now fairly safely without, losing somebody that you really are counting on. And that makes it easier to keep a seventh receiver, which was going to be really hard if you're keeping 4 running backs and 4 tight ends. There's still going to be some conversations to be had, but if you're keeping 15 players at those 3 roster spots, that's a number crunch.
It gets tough. That goes back to like my latest thing is that I agree with you on Matt Bushman. I've been high on him since he was still at BYU, so I'm glad to see it's coming around. And the other thing that I will say is I would like to see Blake Bell get the Matt Moore treatment. Guys with two initials, I think, work. Put him on the practice squad. Call him up if you need him. You need a sneak in the postseason. He's your guy. You know what I mean? But nobody's coming to poach Blake Bell. Whereas Bushman, I agree with you, would be a little bit different. I feel the same way about the offensive line group in that I think there's a couple of reserves that you could actually go down to 8 and be okay, meaning that I think Richie James or Ross or Watson would be more likely to be poached than, say, a Darian Kennard. That I think you can get through that process, especially if you're going to do the merry-go-round with Tony there onto the 53 and then possibly onto the IR for a few weeks, et cetera, et cetera. Does that ring true for you, or do they have to have 9 offensive linemen come cut down dead?
I mean, I think Andy Reid's going to want to have 9 offensive linemen, and I think Andy Heck's going to want to have 9 because remember, you have to dress more or less 8 to take advantage of the roster rules on game day. So having only 8 on the active roster is tight crunch. And I think you're going to want to just from a protection standpoint. I mean, Wanya Morris is obviously going to be making this team. He's too high of a draft pick, and there's too much counting on him. So there's 6. Nick Allegretti is 7 for sure. You're going to have a swing tackle, Lucas Niang or Prince Tegawanongo. Probably want to keep both. I mean, I think the Chiefs would like to keep both if you can. Throw Darian Kennard in. You're already at 10. Yeah. So that's numbers right there. So I mean, I think it's very minimum. I think they want to keep 9, and then it's going to be, can you keep 10? And if that's the case, how many defensive linemen can you keep on the other side? I mean, there's going to be some, and that's why I said, and I think it still holds true. Although, like I said, I think the Nazeeh Johnson injury clarifies a few things and makes the numbers a little easier. But I think that the biggest roster decisions for Brett Veach and his staff is not going to be, the 10th offensive lineman versus the 4th tight end. It's going to be, in those, that's exactly what it's going to be. I'm sorry. It's not going to be the depth chart at each position. It's going to be, do you keep 10 offensive linemen or 7 wide receivers? Do you keep, 5 linebackers? Can you afford to do that? And 10 defensive linemen and 10 defensive backs? I mean, 25 on defense, usually Chiefs are kind of in a 26-24 range. I mean, we'll see how the numbers fall out there, but I think that's going to be a much more difficult decision than I think the depth chart at a lot of these places is shaking itself out pretty well. And by the time the preseason games are in, we'll have a pretty good feel for the depth chart. It's those last 4 or 5 roster spots and deciding between where you keep an extra guy is going to be the really difficult decision.
It's the toe range. I'm completely with you. Who can make that? Who are the long shots that can get into it? And yes, we will answer 1 or 2 of your questions here to wrap up the show right after this. Folks, if you would hit the thumbs up for me and hit that like, very much appreciate that. Get subbed here and on Spotify and app on all those things. We're here for you 5 days a week. You don't want to miss the action, whether it's Matt or Chris or whoever happens to be with me on a given day, or if I do something remote from some strange place, you might enjoy that too. So if you have a question, go ahead and throw them out. We'll probably take 2 before the end of the show, but I want to get to the long shots, Matt. And you kind of named one of my guys. I'm going to let you do the Italian pronunciation because I'm terrible at it, but you got to have a little spark on special teams, right? And that's the one question of all this talent at wide receiver. There's another guy in Nico that is showing that maybe he can bring a little bit something. Maybe there is a Tobe specific player that gets onto this roster. Is there a long shot in your mind that actually has a chance right now?
Good question. I mean, because I don't know there's one that really stands out to me. I mean, like I said, Matt Bushman might be, kind of the poster child for the long shots this year as having the best chance. There could be, offensive and defensive lines. There could be some decisions there, depending on who you once again kind of consider a long shot. Injuries will change that, but I'm not sure that there's anybody that I would have said is in that category of maybe is in the, roster of 70 to 90 before training camp began that's really making a push. I mean, there are players, and Nico is a good example. I mean, could he make a push? I just don't see it because I think he needs more seasoning. He's a great practice squad candidate, but is he somebody who could come in right now and, one, is he the favorite for either of the special teams roles? Well, he's not. I mean, Dave Tobe right now would be going with Richie James as his punt returner and Deneric Prince as his kick returner.
Huh?
And if that's the case, then, there's no place for Nico there. Now there's going to be some opportunities on special teams, and that's one of the things that watch these preseason games, because even a guy like Justin Ross, if he is going to make this team, he can't be an embarrassment on special teams. He's going to have to play them. And he's not going to be a returner. So whether it's a gunner or other positions, Justin Ross is going to have to play that, and he's been working on that in training camp. Let's see what happens in the preseason. And the Nazi, to me, hey, you get Dave Tobe range. I mean, I know there was a lot of discussion about what do you do at safety. Deion Bush is being a great example. Well, Nazi Johnson's lost probably an absolute guarantee for a Deion Bush, because now, if you've lost one of your premier special teams guys, you need a guy like Deion Bush, and Dave Tobe, you're going to pry Deion Bush out of his dead cold hands.
So that said, you never know who's going to creep up. We're going to watch next week, and we'll see what happens in the first preseason game. I want to get to a couple of your guys' questions, because that's always a fun bit of the show for me. And we'll do 2 today. We'll be back with you tomorrow. Remember, we are 5 days a week, and I'm going to be back here tomorrow solo, giving you the real deal. So Stu wanted to know, just my thought, but do the Chiefs trade CEH for a late preseason for a draft pick or something to clear a few million in cap? And really, it's only about $865K is what it is. To make a roster spot. Do you feel that Prince has made enough of an emergement that the CH is A, tradable, and B, do you think there's any value out there?
Well, it's an interesting question, because when we have seen what we've seen from the Chiefs in training camp is that if Isaiah Pacheco is not ready to go, who's the starter? Well, they've been rolling with Clyde Edwards-Helaire as the number one guy. It hasn't been a case where they've gone to the Deneric yet. However, Deneric's getting more and more work with the first team. So could it be at some point that switches where he's now ahead of Clyde on the depth chart? It could happen. It hasn't happened yet, but that would have to be the key before I think you make that decision. And I don't get any sense necessarily that the Chiefs are even thinking that way, because if anything, I think they're thinking of the philosophy, look at what's happened in the last 4 or 5 seasons, and how many times has this team had to go down to a second, third, fourth running back? I mean, remember, it wasn't that long ago this team was so decimated that Derek Gore was getting valuable playing time for this team. I mean, that's how far they had to go down the depth chart. And when you're trying to win a Super Bowl, I mean, if you needed to play Clyde, I think they would be okay with playing Clyde. So is he a luxury that they can afford? Maybe. I mean, he's not that pricey. That's part of it. What are you going to get in return for him? Would it be anything more than a 6th or a 7th? Probably. I mean, and remember, nobody else in this league values running backs either. So, everybody kind of views running backs, and unless you've got one of those guys that's a unicorn, they're all the same. So I think it would be tough to find unless there's a rash of injuries and somebody really needs a guy with Clyde's skill set. I think it'd be hard to try to find a reasonable partner that makes giving up that depth worth it.
Yeah. And the attrition of the position means you might as well have them around one way or the other. I think that's completely viable. Harry's got a good question about expanding on the scenario we brought up before. If there is somebody that you feel you can waive and is a veteran presence that you can put on the practice squad and bring back, especially if we do this carousel with Tony, who would be your preference? Who would you think is probably the least likely to get poached and that would be comfortable in that kind of position?
Yeah, you kind of touched on it earlier about what it's got to be. It can't be anybody who can be exposed to waivers. So, for that standpoint, it's got to be a vested veteran, somebody who's got at least, in their 5th year in the league, somebody who doesn't have any guaranteed money in their contract that's pretty affordable. So you're looking at, like a lot of minimum salary guys. Blake Bell, probably a great example. I mean, he would be kind of the ideal candidate to say, if you needed a roster spot for a day, he could be that guy. Deion Bush, probably another good candidate, could be that guy. It can't be anybody young, even if you say, well, what are the odds that Jack Cochran gets claimed? Still have to expose him to waivers. So there's a chance that somebody would, because he's good special teams player. So there might be a team that would take a chance on him. You're not going to do that with a Justin Ross. Too much upside. You don't want to risk that. So yeah, you're really talking about those veterans, because that's the ones that you can make the handshake deal with, to just say, hey, hang tight for 24 hours. we're doing this, but we're bringing you back, so don't worry.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel too. I was thinking Daniel Wise would qualify, but he's only got 3 years in the league, so he's not there. Danny Shelton would be a possibility, but we saw Danny on the practice squad last year, so I don't know that that's there either. It becomes very troublesome about how do you fit that criteria. So let's hold out hope that it's a nice, simple discussion and everyone separates themselves into their proper places. If you guys want to hear and read more, go to ChiefsDigest.com where you can see Matt's day-to-day practice notebook. Always key information. And we'll continue to read between the lines for you as we go through that, Matt. Anything that we should know about, any last-minute thoughts that you have that we need to be keeping an eye on here as camp gets back in the swing tomorrow?
Yeah, I there's a lot to be watching in that first preseason game on the 13th. For all the guys that I think a lot of people are talking about and want to see how their case for making the 53 and where they are. Because remember, a guy like a Justin Ross hasn't been in a game where he's taken a hit in almost 2 years. You know, he needs to see that. I mean, he's passed every test that they've asked of him so far, but that's going to be the next one. And that's the same for a lot of other guys. I mean, Deneric Prince has caught everything that's been thrown his way in training camp. Well, what's going to happen when there's a guy on the field that really is trying to hit him? That's the kind of stuff that you have to watch for. So so far, I think that this group has really held up pretty well. I'm really intrigued to see what happens in that first preseason game, because that's the next test. And I don't know that we've seen anybody in this camp yet that's really failed. I think that this group, there hasn't been anybody that's disappeared, that we talked about during OTAs and is all of a sudden, falling off the radar. There's nobody there yet. That will happen when the preseason starts. So that's what to watch for, is how these guys hold up in their first taste of NFL action.
It's the first separation factor, and I'm looking forward to it. Tomorrow, I am going to talk about pass rushers and what this team can look like in comparison to last year's pressure percentage, et cetera, et cetera. Don't miss tomorrow's show. Don't miss Chiefs Digest, where you can see Matt. Matt, thanks for your time and being with us again live. We appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, Ryan. Take care, everybody.
You guys have a great one. Make sure you like, sub, and hit that bell. We'll talk to you tomorrow.